Hello and welcome to part 2 of session 19 of History of Healing. We're continuing with the early history of naturopathy. And so now we're going to go back to Benedict Lust, who we talked about briefly as the student and patient of Father Sebastian Kneipp in Germany in the mid-late 1800s. So Benedict Lust actually formed the medical system of naturopathy based on European and American nature cure practices of the 1800s. And so with all of the background of irregular medical activity that we've already well established through the last part of this lecture, that not being welcomed necessarily by the regulars, even though some of the regular medical doctors were actually engaging in it themselves, Lust arrived in the U.S. in 1892, and he had been healed of tuberculosis and then trained in water cure by Father Kneipp in Germany, and then he was sent to America by Father Kneipp expressly for the purpose of establishing that particular method of water cure treatment. And he was only 20 years old at the time. Lust was only 20 years old at the time. The first Kneipp Sanitarium was established shortly before Lust arrived in Newark and New Jersey, and Lust opened the Kneipp Water Cure Institute in New York, listing himself as the owner in 1896. And he also then began giving public lectures on the Kneipp method. At the same time, he opened the first Kneipp store, and that was the precursor to what we are now commonly considering health food stores. He is considered the father of naturopathy, and he was a tireless and avid advocate of naturopathy, speaking and writing both politically and popularly, and he sparked a very rapid rise in the profession for about 40 years. In terms of his qualifications, he graduated from the Homeopathic Medical College in New York in 1913, and he obtained a degree in 1914 in eclectic medicine. He subsequently moved to Florida, and he obtained a medical license there and spent the rest of his days lecturing and publishing. And he maintained his connections with the New York college he had founded, which was called the American School of Naturopathy. He was the founder of the Naturopathic Society of America in 1919 and the American Naturopathic Association, which was incorporated in 18 states at that time. The image here on the slide is the American School of Naturopathy in 1907. The American Naturopathic Association that I mentioned on the last slide was established in 1896, so that was very early on in Lust's adventures in the United States. And for the first 50 years, there was no clear and concise statement of the identity of the profession. So the profession was trying to bring together all of these different threads of alternative health that had arisen over that late 1800s period of time, but there really wasn't still this concise, clear statement of the professional identity, and so perhaps the eclectics were still, or the physiomedicalists would have still been critical of that because that was really their thing. You need to clearly articulate your philosophy. So naturopathy at that point was really whatever Lust and the other nature cure doctors said it was, and that changed over time. It was something that was sort of morphing and changing as different things arose. The formation of the American Naturopathic Association was 50 years behind the formation of the first homeopathic and regular medical associations, which we've talked about in other lectures. And it was formed by Lust and his early allies in the Kneipp hydrotherapy modality. Basically, it was formed as a defense against the violent opposition that the regular medical establishment had raised against them by way of their local medical societies. By the 1940s, there were several four-year naturopathic medical schools. There was licensing for naturopaths in 1/3 of the states and 4 Canadian provinces. So where did the word naturopathy come from? The term itself was coined by a Dr. John Shiel and his wife. They were both homeopaths in 1895 in New York. And the word is a combination of the Greek word for nature, which is physikos, and the root word, which is the root word of the word physician. And naturopath is an anglicization of those root words. Hippocrates, in order to distinguish physicians from those who were dealing with supernatural causes of illness, which was, the gods, said, every practitioner of medicine has to be skilled in nature and must strive to know what man is in relation to food, drink, occupation, and which effect of these has on the other. So Hippocrates used the Greek word for nature to define a practitioner of medicine as a physician. And that's so on the slide it says the Greek word for nature is physikos. In 1896, Shiel actually gave Lust permission to use this word naturopathy to create the American Naturopathic Association. And the term and the association were a protection against the opposition by regular medicine. That was very litigious and territorial. The word litigious means there was a lot of legal actions that were coming out of it. And the regular doctors who were fast developing biomedicine during this time were lobbying for state regulation of naturopaths and limiting medical practice in ways that exposed naturopaths to fines, censure, and worse. Jail was not uncommon for the early naturopaths, and Lust was arrested at least 14 times in his career. In 1902, Benedict Lust purchased the term naturopathy from John Shiel in order to describe the eclectic compilation of doctrines of natural healing that he envisioned to be the future of natural medicine. And a quote from him in 1922 about the use of that term naturopathy. Finally, we decided to use the word naturopath as being the only safe term by which we could designate ourselves as having to do with nature, cure, and disease. By this term, we did not hold ourselves out as practitioners. In 1 year, we had more than 50 arrests. The word naturopath was the magic word that set us free. Although being a misnomer, it covered the subject. It has come to stay as a living protest against the autocracy, coercion, imposition, intolerance, and persecution of the New York County Medical Society Trust in particular, and the American Medical Association Trust in general. And so the image here on this slide is the Battle Creek Sanitarium in Michigan in 1915. And you'll recall that I mentioned this particular sanitarium as being the purview of John Harvey Kellogg in the last part of this lecture. And this was where that sanitarium was. So obviously a very ornate, beautiful building and quite large. You can see these were big institutions. So what was naturopathy early on? What did it consist of? It was considered to be both a method of healing and a way of life. There were three major tenets according to Lust, and that was elimination of evil habits, corrective habits or instituting corrective habits, and new principles of living. And the early theory in naturopathy was published by Lust in health magazines. The Herald of Health and the Naturopath were the two that he wrote. But as stated a couple of slides back, there was early on no clear statement of a philosophy or a cohesive clinical theory. So his definition of naturopathy was based on earlier developments in European hydrotherapy, particularly Father Kneipp, as well as theories of the hygiene movement and European nature cure. So you'll notice that the language that he's using in these three major tenets is familiar to us because we've studied it as we've come through studying these other previous developments. So he was borrowing and trying to pull it together. And his position was that any treatment that was natural would fall under the heading of naturopathy. So the three tenets, as they expanded on them a little bit, the first one, elimination of evil habits, that addresses diet and lifestyle, those things that maintain problems and that need to be rectified. So his view was eliminating overeating, alcoholic drinks, drugs, the use of tea, coffee, and cocoa, meat eating, improper hours of living, waste of the vital force, lowered vitality, sexual and social aberrations, and worry would help correct and maintain health. That's eliminating worry, not worrying. Will correct and maintain health. So corrective habits that one would institute to improve things: correct breathing, correct exercise, right mental attitude, moderation in the pursuit of health and wealth. And the image here on the slide is of a group of group breathing exercises at the Battle Creek Sanitarium around 1900. So you can see the large crowd that there is there, and there are people of every age. There are children in the front row. There are a predominance of women in the group that's there, and obviously a woman leading the breathing exercises as well. So this was very much a more balanced medical environment or health regimen environment than perhaps had been seen previously or was seen in regular medicine. So the last tenet of the new principles of living, this required, in his view, proper fasting, selection of food, hydropathy, light and air baths, mud baths, osteopathy, and chiropractic, and we'll talk about the connections of those a bit later. Other forms of mechanical therapies, mineral salts, electropathy, heliopathy, steam or Turkish baths, and sitz baths. And a sitz bath is a bath that you take where only your pelvic area is submerged. Oftentimes it means moving back and forth between a bath that's hot and a bath that's cold as well, to stimulate circulation to the pelvic organs and the lower eliminative organs, which was obviously a very big focus of naturopathy. So Lust was aligned with a philosophy of eclectic medicine and the view of whatever works, use it. And eclectic herbalism was a big part of naturopathy from the very early days. So osteopathy and chiropractic. From the beginning of naturopathy, there was a connection between these two disciplines and naturopathy. And we're going to cover the histories, the particular histories of osteopathy and chiropractic in their own separate lecture next week. So I won't spend too much time on this, but it's important to note that the early influence of these disciplines on the formation of naturopathy and a profession. And Lust included osteopathy and chiropractic as therapeutic modalities within naturopathy. In addition to his medical training in eclectic medicine and homeopathy and his training with Father Kneipp, he had studied osteopathy as well as chiropractic, and he incorporated those methods into his treatments. And you still see this in American naturopathy today in particular, where the core education in American naturopathy includes things that look a lot like chiropractic and also elective subjects in osteopathic treatments. And so historically in America and presently also in Europe, most naturopaths were or are also either an osteopath or a chiropractor, so that often these two go hand in hand. So Lust met Andrew Taylor Still, who was the creator of osteopathy in 1915. And Andrew Taylor Still was at that time bemoaning the changes to osteopathy, and it had departed from drugless therapy at that point. So he still believed at that point in time, and this is a quote, osteopathy is doomed as the school that could have incorporated all the natural and biological healing arts. And so Lust was determined to have naturopathy fill that void and not follow the same path as losing its drugless therapy status. So as mentioned earlier, Lust had studied chiropractic, and that was created by Daniel Palmer Daniel David Palmer. And Lust had a very close relationship with B.J. Palmer, who was Daniel Palmer's son. And he continued that relationship for some time. So there was a lot of blending going on and a lot of that use what works going on. And they were very respectful of each other's approaches and freely sharing ideas. And so then we come to Louisa Lust, and she was Benedict's wife. She was living from 1868 to 1925, and she's considered the matriarch of naturopathy, if he is the father of naturopathy. She studied nature cure in London before she came to America, and after she came to America, she actually met and married Benedict, and they became sort of the power couple of naturopathy. She was a naturopathic doctor herself, and she specialized in treatment of women. And a quote from her: "Do not under any circumstances shut the air and sunshine from your home. Do not mind if the furniture, curtains, draperies, etc. will fade. It is better to let them fade than you should." So Louisa Lust was wealthy. She was the leading financial partner in establishing the Nature Cure sanatoriums in New Jersey and Florida, and she provided the finance for the establishment of the first naturopathic college. So she was very much instrumental in those things. She also paid for most of the legal defenses for her husband, as he was arrested quite often. She avoided the limelight herself as much as possible. She was really a powerful presence in the early formation of the naturopathic profession, but she preferred to stay out of the limelight, which probably saved her from getting arrested as much. She was an accomplished writer, especially on living a healthy vegetarian lifestyle and the healing power of food. And she believed firmly in the vital force as the healing power within the body. For her successful practice of naturopathy rested on three factors: freedom from fear, mastery of hygiene, and never forgetting to treat the individual by modifying and adjusting to each person. So she was a real champion of individualized treatment. And I think that it's really worth noting that one of her tenets of health was freedom from fear. If you think about what women, the stance of women in society at that point in time, and the things that women had been through historically and in the present at that time, it's really quite a forward-thinking and really deep contemplation on the nature of health for her at that time to state that freedom of fear was vital to health, and that is certainly a truth. With regard to her reliance upon food, we can lengthen our life, she wrote, or shorten it by eating. So she definitely believed in the healing power of food and also the way that foods can diminish your health. And another quote from her: "One of the greatest evils to be avoided by those who are nursing the sick is that of overeating." So she was a staunch advocate of hydrotherapy, saying that if all people understood how to use water, 1/2 of all the afflictions from disease would be eliminated. On to Henry Lindlar, and some of you may have heard of him. He is the writer of our seminal text that we still use in the study of naturopathic philosophy. So he lived from 1852 to 1925, and he wrote Nature Cure in the original edition in 1913. That is still our text in naturopathic philosophy, and if you haven't seen it yet, you will soon if you're a naturopathic student. And he went beyond Lust in really trying to set out a cohesive, although not concise, theory and philosophy of nature cure. So he provided the foundation of our philosophy and clinical theory that we practice under today. He was also born in Germany, but he was a Chicago businessman, and he had been indulging in the latter part of the 19th century in a quite abundant lifestyle, we'll call it. And as a consequence, he actually became quite ill by about the age of 41, and he had what we would now call type 2 diabetes. And he received no relief from the Orthodox practitioners. And after exposure to the work of Johann Schroth, he moved to one of Father Kneipp's sanitariums, and he recovered on a prescription from Father Kneipp of no bread, no cereal grains, no meat, only greens and vegetables and fruit, and a regimen of hydrotherapy. And he then returned to Chicago, and he enrolled into the Homeopathic and Eclectic College of Illinois, which was called National Medical University, and he received a medical degree in 1902. So he's gone from being a businessman to now being a doctor. He then opened his own sanitarium in Chicago, and it became a very well respected, with one of the most advanced diagnostic departments in the country. And he treated hundreds of patients a day there using natural methods, including extensive hydrotherapy. He subsequently then opened the Lindlar Health Food Store and established the Lindlar College of Natural Therapeutics. And he was of the opinion that the symptoms expressed by the body were the body's attempt to heal itself. And you see this throughout his book, throughout Nature Cure. And that symptoms should not be suppressed, but they should actually be supported and allowed to bloom as the body tries to throw off illness. He was a strong proponent of the concept of a fever being a healthy bodily reaction that should be let to run its course. And he wrote numerous other books beyond Nature Cure, and also lots of articles, including a 7-volume text that was called Natural Therapeutics. In his writing, he tended to use the terms nature cure and natural therapeutics rather than the term naturopathy, but his writings are still to this day considered some of the most foundational of the naturopathic profession. And Nature Cure sets out an early view for a systematic approach to naturopathic diagnosis and treatment. So from Henry Lindlar, we have the Catechism of naturopathy, and his presentation was of a 5-part therapeutic progression in naturopathic therapeutics. So the first one is return to nature, and this includes diet, dress, exercise, rest, and other hygienic considerations. Secondly, elemental remedies, which he considered to be water, air, light, and electricity. Third, chemical remedies, which he considered to be herbs and homeopathy. Fourth, mechanical remedies, which he considered to be manipulations, and by that I mean spinal or bony manipulations or manipulations of the soft tissue, such as massage. And fifth, mental and spiritual remedies, such as prayer, positive thinking, and service to your family and community. So if we look at this closely, once you become familiar, for those of you who are naturopathic students, with the naturopathic therapeutic order, this was definitely a precursor to the therapeutic order, and we'll see that in the next lecture. Sorry, in session 20 is what I meant, is when we'll see that. So, Nature Cure was published in 20 editions from 1913 to 1922. It is a complete revolution in the art and science of living at that period of time, and I would posit that that is still true now if we were to follow it. It sets out theories on the causes of disease, the stages of inflammation, the effects of suppressing symptoms or diseases, and the different natures of acute and chronic illnesses and their treatments. It proposes a system of building the entire being in harmony with a constructive principle in nature on the physical, mental, moral, and spiritual planes of being. So from the image a couple of slides ago, Lindlar considered there were 3 primary causes of disease, and those were lowered vitality, abnormal composition of the blood and lymph, and accumulation of morbid matter and poisons. And for those of you who will go on to study more in naturopathy, these will be greatly expanded upon in your future exploits. But just a brief explanation of those now. So lowered vitality, we all really understand what that means sort of intuitively, and we know when our vitality is low or when our energy is low. He was particularly talking about a lowering of the vitality in such a way that the vital force is not able to overcome illness, is not able to mount a proper defense against illness, and has to be supported in that. Abnormal composition of blood and lymph goes back to what are you eating, what are you drinking, do you have the right nutrients in your blood, do you have the right mix of oxygen in your blood to oxygenate your tissues, and those sorts of things. So it's about what building blocks of health do you have in your blood, and accumulation of morbid matter and poisons. In today's language, obviously, we would say toxins, and as the general term for that. There were other evolutionaries in the development of naturopathy early on in the U.S. John Henry Tilden was a medical doctor who focused on toxemia. Tilden was a practicing physician, and he became disillusioned with the practice of orthodox medicine and developed the theory of auto-intoxication, which is the theory that toxins are produced in the GIT because of improper digestion and assimilation of food. And so through the proper use of dietetics and nutrition, the body could be restored because the proper diet reduced the toxicity of impure foods in the body. Elmer Lee, also a medical doctor, was an early naturopath who further developed the hygienic system, and he followed along in the footsteps of Russell Troll with his hygiotherapy. Bernard McFadden, who is pictured there on the slide, considered to be the father of what we call physical culture. He is, and that's what we would call bodybuilding today, probably, as well as other things. And he established gymnasiums around the country to promote the importance of sound physical fitness to ensure true health. And so this image is of him in 1905 when he was about 38 years old. And then Joe Shelby Riley was the father of zone therapy, and this was something that Lust was also very interested in, as propounded by Shelby Riley. He was a chiropractor, and zone therapy was a forerunner of acupressure. And through pressure and manipulation using the fingers and using percussion of the spinal column, there were zones in the body and different aspects of the health that he said could be impacted by pressure or tapping on these different body parts. And we certainly can see that both in historical Chinese medicine theory as well as in common usage today. So we'll finish up this part talking about vitalism in naturopathy, and we'll go first to Henry Lindlar. His first primary cause of disease, as we discussed a couple of slides ago, is lowered vitality. And the first in progression of treatments is those that restore and build vitality. And he considered, as well as other naturopaths considered, lowered vitality is actually caused by violation of nature's laws. And so when we talk about things that restore and build vitality, we're talking about sleep and proper food and movement of the body and other things that are natural to us, sunshine, fresh air, etc. A decline in cellular vitality was thought to be brought about by wrong habits of living, by wrong thinking and feeling, overwork, unnatural stimulation, and excesses of various kinds. So there was a really varied group of people, ideas, and philosophies that were contributing overall to the picture of naturopathy, and Lust was sort of the glue that was holding it all together. He considered that anything that was natural health would fall under the banner of naturopathy. But with Lindlar's definitions of the various aspects of nature cure, being founded upon a vitalistic philosophy of medicine and working on illness from the level of cause, the individual modalities included in the therapeutic practice became not as important to the definition of the profession. So the practice itself drew very much on the eclectic approach of use whatever works as long as it's natural. And it's worth noting that some of the things that they considered natural, we might not necessarily consider natural today. For example, we could consider treatments that they used that utilized electricity on the body, and whether we would consider that natural or not today. So that's the end of part 2. Your revision questions are here as well as on your LMS. And your other food for thought, Lindlar stated in the early 1900s that bacteria were a secondary and not a primary cause of illness. Given what you know about the status of germ theory at that time, what do you think about him making that statement? And might also think about, what do you think that the regular medical doctors thought about that statement at that point in time? So thank you for joining, and I will see you in part 3.